Right. So, good afternoon. I work for a company called CareZone. I've been there for a whole month at this point, so I want to take a moment to thank them for being like, okay with me saying, hey, it's been a great month. Now I'm going to go to Australia for a week. See you guys later. I'm also really thankful to the organizers for inviting me. I've never been to Australia, so I'm really excited to be here. So last year, I spent a lot of time talking about a concept I was just calling humane development. Put simply, it's based on something very, very obvious, right? You would think. We're humans. We work with other humans to build software that is used, in fact, by other humans, right? Seems obvious, but we sometimes don't act like it. And there are a few different sort of attributes that are core to the idea of humane development. And the goal really is to give each developer more autonomy. But what we want to focus on today is empathy, because without that first building block, none of the other things are possible. So you may have guessed at this point that a warning is in order. This is going to be a soft talk about a soft skill. But being a soft talk about a soft skill, it's safe to say that this might be the softest talk you've seen all conference. Now, we're talking about empathy, and I'm at a conference full of Rubyists, so it seems like maybe I'm preaching to the choir, right? But, I mean, I have always thought of Ruby as being basically made of love and hugs. I mean, we do Friday hugs. I wish I had time to do a Friday hug right now, but, it's 20 minutes, and I'm already a minute in. But it's easy to think that. But I came across this a couple of weeks ago in a Ruby issues thread that you may be familiar with. And I had to pick my jaw up off the floor. I mean, you see something like this, and it's like, well, maybe we should talk a little bit about why empathy matters when we're building software, since people seem to think it's not necessary. So I want to tell you a very quick story about one of the most satisfying commits I've ever made. So a previous employer of mine was one of those trendy startups with serious venture capital. And there was a policy that all new developers on my team would make their rounds the first time they were on site to visit all of the different offices that we had in that city. And we would sit down and basically pair with people doing other jobs for a little while. And so during my first week on the job, I got the whirlwind tour. And one of the buildings was where the people who do our copy editing worked. And so they get copy from our copywriters, and they edit it for tone and content and all of that. And then they determined really how eventually we were going to be selling our products, what we were going to be saying about it. This is where I met a woman we're just going to call Anne. And I'm sitting with her, and I'm watching what she's doing. And she does something interesting. She starts to copy the text from a WYSIWYG form that we have on the application, the web application that we're using. She pastes it into Microsoft Word. She makes a few edits. She copies from Microsoft Word, pastes it right back into the WYSIWYG form. And I'm sort of like, OK, what just happened? And she very patiently explains to me. She says, well, we need to verify the word count of the text, and it has to fit within a certain constraint for our copy. And also, there's this problem when I edit where sometimes it just stops taking my key presses. And so instead of dealing with that, I just edit in Word and then paste it over. And so I'm just feeling horrible about this bug that she's dealing with. And then I'm thinking, like, word count is a solved problem. I think we can help you with this. And, so I tell Anne, I think we can solve these problems for you. And the way she lit up, you would have thought I gave her a new car. And, so the next week I added some handling of the missed key presses, and I added a simple word count. And, I mean, honestly, the diff maybe, and I'm guessing on the high end, 100 lines. Right? It wasn't a significant amount of code. It wasn't particularly clean. It was not tested because we had absolutely no JavaScript tests at that point in our code base. But it made Anne happy. And Anne was experiencing pain. It was just a little bit of pain, to be sure. But it was a little enough even that she didn't even think it was worth mentioning to anyone. And she just worked around it. But multiply that by every single person on her floor that was doing some similar workaround, and the amount of pain that was being experienced by the organization and by these real people was immense. And so this is why I started writing software to begin with, was to make myself and others feel less pain. And so I want you to, if you have to close your eyes, but I want you to think back to the first real code that you ever wrote. And I don't mean code that you were doing as part of an exercise as you were learning, but rather, what is the first project that you undertook to try to write for usable code by another human being or yourself? You remember that code? All right. So most of the time, there's a good chance that the code that you're thinking of right now was written to scratch a personal itch, right? And the thing about that is maybe it was something you tracked your like CD, DVD, those were things, maybe you remember them, collection. A friend of mine was writing a Ruby app to plan his meals and his grocery trips, like he was learning Ruby and that's what he was doing. Point is, do you remember how driven you were to complete this task and how satisfying that work felt as you succeeded in scratching that itch? When you write code for yourself, you have this very tight feedback loop. And you know exactly why you're writing what you're writing, and you know when it's doing what you want it to do. You know when it's improving your life. And so you're in a position to figure out how well the code you write solves your problem. This same feeling, not coincidentally, is what made that tiny commit several years ago for me feel so pleasant and memorable. I knew it solved a problem, and I could feel the collective pain of Anne and every other person that was on this floor tolerating this annoyance, and I knew I could do something about it. So once we realized, I love stock photography, by the way. You'll see a lot of wonderful stock photography. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person that ever bought this. But once we realized that code we write isn't actually just about proving what elite hackers we are, but it's making things better for people, we can experience something that is very close to approaching that level of satisfaction that we get in that tight feedback loop where we know that what we're writing is good and is going to solve a problem, is going to help somebody. So in short, empathy is a superpower. To learn empathy is to teach that little voice inside your head how to speak the thoughts and feelings of someone who isn't you. And as you practice, it won't just make software development better and more satisfying. It will actually make you a better developer. You'll find yourself spending less time working on features back and forth, because you'll have a better sense of like why you're building what you're building and what you're trying to accomplish. You'll find your best guess at a feature implementation is probably closer to what the user would like right out of the gate. And it's really important to make it clear that this is not about what would I want if I were them. This is what would make them smile, what would help them. And I mean, if you're empathizing well, you're going to find yourself building things that people love, even if they didn't know they were possible until the moment you built them, right? Like this. As software developers, we're constantly learning. We're expected to become proficient at all kinds of new frameworks and libraries and programming languages on an ongoing basis, right? But it's not just technical skills that we learn. We're similarly confident that, given enough time and energy, we can learn to play a guitar or to paint or to dance salsa. Our natural aptitudes for these things might differ, but we don't consider them impossible. That's because they're hard skills. Hard skills are specific and they're measurable, and they're things that can be defined. And if we can measure them, then we can easily gauge our progress as we try to improve. And we like to focus on hard skills because we have this concrete evidence that we got somewhere at the end of the day. A large part of what we do every day as developers thrives on measurability. I'm sorry, I have that upside down. Is that better for y'all? Yeah. I'm here for the next 10 minutes and 50 seconds, folks. We write tests for our code. We profile, we benchmark its performance. Soft skills, on the other hand, they're a little blurrier. They're intangible. They're hard to quantify. And when something's hard to quantify, it makes us second guess whether our hard work's paying off. It's really tough to stay motivated when you feel like you're in the dark when it comes to gauging your progress. That's why we choose to work in a field whose problems always have one measurably correct solution, where all questions have a correct answer, and there's never a hint of nuance to be had, right? Good news. In the course of developing software, in addition to the kinds of tangible things we talk about with tests and benchmarks, there's also countless intangible things that we work to develop without actually realizing that they aren't technical at all. We think they're technical, and so we stick with it. Because really, code is communication, after all, and when we're striving to find the most intention-revealing way to structure our code, aren't we beginning to grasp at what someone else might feel when they read it later? But communication is one thing. We don't very easily fool ourselves into thinking that empathy is a technical skill. It makes us easy to ignore, right? We can ignore empathy because it's not technical. It's something we're either just good at or bad at by nature. It's not a learnable thing, right? So as you probably know at this point, I'm from America. And the organizers have given me a stage, and I have all the power up here. So what's the point of being an American in power without a little bit of power abuse? So it's rant time right now. I look around and I see a whole lot of men in this audience. And if I can speak to the men specifically for just a moment, we are the worst offenders when it comes to writing off empathy as something we don't need to be concerned about. You know, we read a headline like this one. This was from Science magazine about women being more likely to mirror yawning, and that therefore proves how much more empathetic they are than men. And we say, see, we're just bad at this stuff. Science told me that we're bad. And we gloss over the print in the actual article that says, you know, there's like a 15% difference here. It's really about half and half, 40%, 55%. What's the sample size? We don't know. Because of a lot of cognitive biases, we miss the actual numbers. And I mean, that headline could have conveyed just about as much useful information if it had been rewritten as roughly half of population mirrors yawning, yawning study suggests. Or heck, hey, look, here's a stock photo of 3 women yawning. Speaking of statistics, according to the most recent data from the FBI, this is from 2010, of the murderers whom we know the gender of, over 90% of them are male. So I have a headline for you. Now, I could write something like this, and I can then start counting down to the inevitable response, right? So let's get real for a second. There was a study published 15 years ago by Christy Klein and Sarah Hodges. They're from the University of Oregon. And it was about, there's this notion of empathic accuracy, and the ability to infer the feelings and the thoughts of the people without being them, but rather just understanding. It was originally developed by a guy by the name of William Ickes, and it basically, the way that you test empathic accuracy, this is a well-known test that they do, is you pick a target. There's a target subject, and they talk about an event or a problem that triggered them emotionally in some way. And then after they've talked about it, they then go back and they rewatch this video, and they describe the ways that they felt at the times that they were describing these various things. So that's captured. And then they have perceiver subjects in the test that are asked to describe those feelings that they believe the target was feeling as they watched the video. And what's interesting is, as Ickes had originally been doing these studies, the first 7 of these showed absolutely no difference between men and women. And then the next 3 started to show significant more empathic accuracy from women. The only difference was that in the last 3, they had started asking people, how accurately do you think you've inferred the emotions of these people? And suddenly, because people were now realizing that they were being gauged on their empathic accuracy, the blindness of the study was compromised. And what was happening was women have been conditioned through society to believe more that empathy is more integral to their sense of self. And so they amped it up a notch. They gave their best effort. The men were just like, empathy, I don't care about that, or whatever. Now, they introduced a new variable into the equation. They started paying people for right answers. A kind of right answer got you $1. A dead-on answer got you $2. They hypothesized, and this is from Klein and Hodges' follow-up study, they hypothesized that the motivating effects of money would suddenly make men do something useful. In the money condition, surprise, surprise, both men and women perform well. Who knew, right, if you pay somebody to do something? Now, what if I told you that as software developers, we're already being paid to be empathic. And furthermore, that as humans, we're already supposed to be empathic. It's not a woman thing. It's not a man thing. It's a human thing. Saying you'll never learn empathy is as self-defeating as saying you'll never be any good at math or figure out what this means in JavaScript. I want to change gears for a second. Rats don't enjoy swimming. Oh, they can swim. They can swim for up to 3 days if they need to tread water, and they can hold their breaths for up to 3 minutes. And if you give a rat, though, a choice between swimming and not swimming, it's going to pick not swimming every time. Now, I'm serious about this. People checked. They gauged how, this is science at work. We'll figure out how much they like to swim. Now, last year, researchers at a university in Japan called the Kwansei Gakuin University published a study involving rats and their least favorite hobby. They built this enclosure, and it had an area where they would put a doused rat, and then they would put a dry rat on the ground area. Now, the rats eventually were able to figure out that they were able to free their cage mate by opening this door that was in between them. So on one side of a box, the dry rat figures this out, and he very rapidly, we'll actually show it, within a few days they figured this out, and they learned how to help their soaked friends to safety. Now, if the other side was dry, they wouldn't bother. They didn't care. But if the rat was wet and in distress, they would help him out. It's like Rat Bro, helping Rat Bro out. It's really sweet. And he wasted no time in helping him. More interesting than that, rats that had previously been soaked were much more quick to help the soaked rats in the future. So when they would switch roles, they were like, I know those feels. Those feels suck. And then they even upped the stakes. They added an extra compartment where there were dried chocolate cereal. And the rat could choose between helping his buddy or getting the cereal. And still, in the majority of cases, the rats would help the drenched friend before going on to get the cereal. And they would even share the food with the one that had been wet, which is, come on, that's pretty cute. I don't care if you don't like rats. So there was no reward structure in place for this experiment to train the rats to help each other. They just did, because they're built that way. And if a rat is built for expressing empathy, I have a hunch you are too. So to put it another way then, Dude Bro here, busy crushing code to worry about is too busy to worry about empathy, could just as easily be put as, I'm literally less emotionally intelligent than a rat. So what really this comes down to is, yeah, you know, so empathy is learnable, but because you're already built for it, learning empathy is a lot less like learning something and a lot more about unlearning the things that stand between you and it. So I want to give you just 3 ideas, something to try. We don't have a lot of time. First, here's what we have learned up to this point, that we are the star. We act like we are the star of our own reality television show and everyone else is an extra. But in reality, we're one of approximately 7.4 billion people, and people are super interesting. So be curious about others and strike up a conversation with at least one stranger a week. A 1 out of 7.4 billion ratio is not too much to ask. I think you can find one person every week to talk to. Make them the star and find out about them. Not in like a creepy way, like tell me everything that you have ever thought, but just get to know them. Another thing that we've been led to believe up to this point is that we need to be heard. We default, in fact, to thinking about how we're going to respond to someone else when we're listening to them, before they've even finished speaking. But we're so worried about making our voices heard that we don't listen properly. So waiting to speak is not listening. Get comfortable with silence. Allow room for ideas to expand. Some of the most meaningful things you're ever going to hear are going to come after a period of prolonged silence in a room with someone else. You need to hear. You don't need to be heard. The last thing that I want to recommend you reconsider is that you don't know. We regularly are told that, that we tell people this all the time, right? I know what you're going to say. I know your type. I know people like him or her. We want to categorize because that's easy. We need to challenge our prejudices. Prepare ourselves to be surprised. Assume we don't know what that person is going to say. And even I know how you feel is not as helpful as you think it is. Let them tell you how they feel. You might be surprised. It's going to take practice, like any other skill. You're not always going to be able to tell that you're getting better, but trust me, You were built for this. You will get better. Thanks. I have